But I had to realize, my doctor said, Stephanie, if you don't do this, you're not going to survive. So I had to somewhat be aware and be cautious of really what I said to the medical field, because I could see that there was just this system that wanted me to be codependent on it. And I didn't want that. I never returned. And I realized that I was under a form of brainwash being a vegan and vegetarian. Just because you have a new kidney doesn't mean that you have the right, or you should go back to your unhealthy lifestyle that maybe got you in that position to begin with. We need to somehow level up in our care and our ability to critically think and go outside of the boxes that we've been in to help patients further.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Today we have with us Stephanie, who is going to share with us some success information and maybe some other things. So Stephanie, let's get started by just asking you to kind of tell us a little bit about your background.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shawn, for having me. I'm so happy to be here and to share my story. I think I'll start by just giving you the most important information maybe first, so I can kind of build up to my success story. And that is, I sit here today as a 48-year-old woman who's had very severe and complex health issues that started at age 20. And believe it or not, in my 20s, I endured 5 years of hemodialysis. I received a kidney transplant at age 30, and then I had a replacement kidney transplant 7 years ago. So although today I might look like I'm healthy and haven't endured significant health complications, the reality is I've taken some major wrong turns in my health journey, especially when I was younger. I bought into a lot of ideology and collectivism regarding what it meant to be vegan, and somehow being a vegan or a vegetarian made me more righteous or healthy. I was so completely naive and ill-informed. And that actually started my health journey, was from a state of health. So I know that a lot of people start their health journey because they've made poor decisions. My story is a little bit of the inverse. I started to seek out yoga and alternative therapies and health in my late teens and early 20s. And it landed me in a community of yoga instructors and yogis. And then that began taking it to the next step with what I would call kind of almost health narcissism, which you become obsessed with depriving yourself from foods. And one after another, it was, oh, we don't eat red meat now, or now we don't eat meat, and now we're adding green smoothies, and now we don't eat fat, and now we don't eat this. So, by the time I was about 23 years old, I started to have very significant autoimmune issues. And I had been around to about 5 different doctors getting misdiagnosed every time. Some of them really ridiculous diagnoses, because I know it's hard for certain providers to say to somebody, I don't know what's wrong with you. So at 23, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is kind of interesting at my age. And, they thought maybe I had Lyme's disease and all sorts of other things. And what was happening, actually, looking back, retrospectively, was that I was really screwing up my body as so far as what I needed for my nutrients. And I had this mentality that less was more, and that anything that had to do with meat or fat or anything of that substance was going to be really toxic for my body. So that's kind of how my health journey began. I was healthy. And then because of the lifestyle I adopted and I bought into, that actually, I think, began my really true powerful downward spiral into my autoimmune disease, just completely wreaking havoc on my body. And by 24, Shawn, I was in complete multi-organ failure. And they had no idea what to do with me besides just load me up on steroids and all sorts of experimental drugs. I was on Rituxan, which is kind of like a chemo style drug. They were just trying anything. And basically they said to me at 23, 24, Stephanie, we don't know what else to do for you. I was seeing a multitude of, infectious disease doctors, cardiologists, nephrologists, all sorts of doctors. They said, we don't know what's going on with you. Your immune system just will not quiet down. And they said, you have to pray and maybe prepare that we're not going to be able to figure this out.
Wow. That's, I'm sure it's depressing, frustrating, and all those things together. So the one diagnosis I heard them say was rheumatoid arthritis, which would, to me, indicate some sort of joint problem. Obviously you said you had a lot of renal issues, which
Right.
sometimes, were related, but it sounds like you've got this. I mean, if you could say, did they actually diagnose you with several actual conditions over time? Because obviously going on dialysis requires, at least to say advanced, nephropathy or renal failure.
Yep. So eventually, after the misdiagnosis and the ins and outs of the hospital stays and like 1,000 milligram drips of Salimedrol and everything they were doing to try to keep me alive, it actually happened where one time I went into the hospital and all of a sudden it presented, which was the butterfly mask, which is really indicative of
Lupus. Yeah,
so,
lupus. Yeah.
Yep. So that was my official diagnosis, was systemic lupus erythematosus, which then obviously led into, it wanted to attack all my organs. It wanted to take me down, but then eventually it settled in the kidneys, which then by 24, it was, lupus nephritis. And they gave me a biopsy against my will because I was so confused. I thought that I was this picture of health and I was doing everything right. I felt so betrayed by what I was doing. I thought I was being very righteous, but basically the biopsy proved, and they said, look, you're very sick and you need to prepare for a reality of dialysis within the next year. So that was when I was about to turn 25 is when I actually then had to succumb to all of this health nonsense that I thought I was doing that was helping me was actually harming me. And I felt betrayed and I felt confused. And I just had to at that point, surrender to the healthcare system, which previous to that I was a little bit against because I was very much into natural health. But I had to realize, my doctor said, Stephanie, if you don't do this, you're not going to survive. So you have to just, basically, he said to me, let go of all your woo-woo thinking. Stop the yoga, stop the meditation. None of that's going to help you now. You got to just be here in this moment, take the meds, and start on dialysis.
So at that time, 25 years old, given the diagnosis of biopsy-proven lupus, quite sick, you were yoga. What were you doing dietarily at the time? Were you on a plant-based diet at that time, or what were you doing?
So from the ages of 20 to 25, I appeared to be healthy. But I started vegan. Again, I started the reduction of the food, and then I ended up strict vegan and trying to do the best I could to get my nutrients combined properly to get the amino acids. But for 5 years, Shawn, which was really leading into this dire illness, I was a yoga instructor and thought I was doing everything right as far as my environment and my health. And I was very strict vegan, not eating a lot of fat either.
Okay. And so did the doctors at the time, oops, what happened here? Oops, sorry.
Okay.
So we cut out for a second. So at the doctors at the time when you were diagnosed with lupus, and we're talking about, dialysis and so on and so forth and all the meds, were they aware of what your diet was at the time? And did they have any sort of say, hey, this is good, bad, indifferent? What was it? What was the thought at that time?
Shawn, nobody ever asked me about my diet. I think because there was a presumption that I walked into the office, and at that time I still looked a little similar to how I do today. So there was this just maybe assumption that, well, she must be somewhat healthy because she looks healthy. Nobody asked me about my diet. It only came up when I was very, very ill and my blood work was just showing terrible anemia and iron deficiency. And then a doctor actually said to me, what are you eating? Can you eat more meat or fish or something like that? That's the only time anybody ever asked me about my diet.
Okay. So then what happens? So you get this diagnosis. They say, hey, prepare for dialysis. Yeah. Did you, obviously you had to look inward and say, what the heck am I doing? What's going on? Why me? I'm sure they had no answer as to why it occurred. You said, well, genetics, bad luck. We don't know. I'm sure that's the answer they gave you. But So how did you receive that news, and what did you do?
Mentally, I was devastated because, again, in my mind, I thought, I've adopted this incredibly healthy lifestyle. How could this possibly happen to me? I'm very deliberate about buying organic vegetables and the way I'm food combining. I almost was a little bit of a perfectionist with it. So I felt very confused. And, I didn't have much time to prepare for dialysis because when it's time to do dialysis, you have to do it. And when they did the biopsy, my kidneys were already almost at that stage to start dialysis. So I didn't have much time to process, but what I thought was even more fascinating and depressing was when I started dialysis, which was just maybe 6 months after that biopsy and that news, was the dietitian came in to see me on dialysis. And the message there at that time, now this is like, maybe 15, 17 years ago, the dietitian said, look, right now with your body and your condition, you can't have potassium and phosphorus. You have to start to limit certain foods, because of the dialysis and the kidney failure. So when you need a snack, we need to have you snack on like cookies or cake. And then I was really confused because I went from being super healthy to then being in dialysis where they were telling me to limit my vegetables, limit my fruits, and snack on cookies and cake. And I just thought, wow, this is just so bizarre. I don't even know how to digest this information.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's interesting because the majority of people that go on dialysis, or at least a significant percentage of them, are there for diabetes, right?
Right.
And that would be like the world's worst advice for those people, in my view. But anyway, so obviously that's got to be like, okay, what? So did you adopt her? Did you follow their advice? What did you do at that point?
Yeah, so what I did, in my early years also, I studied nutrition quite a bit. And, I've always been very proactive about my human experience being my own. So that started a problem when I got really deep into the system because I understood that my opinion or maybe some of my thoughts didn't matter as much to the protocols, but I had a good nutritionalist and I was just challenging her. I said, look, this isn't healthy. Like, there's got to be another alternative. I said, look around this dialysis clinic. Most everybody's overweight. They're on dialysis. I'm like, something isn't adding up here. And her and I started to really, she appreciated my thoughts and my ideas. And basically what I did was I educated myself, Shawn. I mean, fortunately now the dialysis protocol with food has leveled up a little bit. But at that time, I had to just really investigate on my own. Like, what are the low potassium vegetables and fruits I can eat? What is the healthy food that I can eat on dialysis? Because I'm certainly not going to start just loading up on carbohydrates because I know that that's not healthy.
And you said, I assume that you were not overweight at that time. I mean,
No.
It sounds like you're probably thin. I mean, obviously still appear to be, certainly not overweight.
Yep.
So you diagnosed with lupus nephritis. Any other conditions concurrently that you ended up developing or had during that time frame?
What I will say is, when somebody's ill with an autoimmune condition and then you're in kidney failure and you're on dialysis, I mean, the body, it feels like there's other things going wrong. And I will tell you this, that the healthcare field and certain doctors that I had were not shy in trying to maybe give me other diagnosis if I spoke up too much. So again, at some point, I had the wisdom within myself to understand that I couldn't tell the doctors everything I was feeling. Because at some point, like if it was not as serious as a condition, they might be looking for something else to diagnose me with. So I started to be a little bit limited and only speak up when I thought something was truly serious. Because again, I just felt like, well, they're going to diagnose me with 3 more autoimmune diseases and within a short amount of time. And my psyche, my mentality kind of already accepted that I was in kidney failure and my job was to try to get a transplant and then to become healthy again. It wasn't to become codependent to a medical system with 10 more diseases and conditions. So I had to somewhat be aware and be cautious of really what I said to the medical field because I could see that there was just this system that wanted me to be codependent on it, and I didn't want that. So fortunately, I wasn't diagnosed with anything else. I just worked really hard on trying to be as healthy as I could during that time, follow the instructions with the certain nutrients, and then to also really powerfully work on my mental health because that was another thing, is the proclivity towards stress, anxiety, depression, and mental health when you're in that kind of a health crisis is so high that literally they would pretty much just offer me like, oh, if you're not feeling good, like most people in here are on Prozac or on some sort of anti-anxiety medicine. It's just, I felt like they wanted me to just be like everybody else. And I was a little bit of a rebel, and I wasn't going to just fall into that trap. So.
Now, typically dialysis is done typically around 3 times a week. Were you on that schedule? Like every, 3 times a week, you're in the dialysis center hanging out for 4 or 5 hours,
Yep.
basically exchanging your blood.
Yep. So when I first started dialysis, again, as you would know, you don't start dialysis until your kidney function is really, really poor. So I was just over a couple of years getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And then when it got to the point where I was on dialysis, I actually had an event where I hemorrhaged. They claimed that I hemorrhaged into my lungs, something to do with the lupus potentially, or the disease, or the fluid around my body that was building up. So I kind of had this crazy near-death experience, and I actually woke up from that experience in the hospital getting dialysis for the first time. So that's kind of how it started for me. So I had to do in clinic. I was in the hospital for about a month doing dialysis, and at that time they were doing plasmapheresis on me to try to do whatever they could to clean out my body, which was very shocking. But I felt like I got to just go with this flow here. And then I went into clinic. I was healthy enough to go into clinic. And that's another environment, Shawn. I mean, I had no idea how many people in my own community were on dialysis and how many clinics there even were in my own community. I was shocked when I started to educate myself how many people are in kidney failure and on dialysis. It's shocking when you become aware. But yeah, I had to do hemodialysis for, it was about 3.5 years before I became aware that there was something called peritoneal dialysis, and that actually I could get trained to do it at home. But nobody really offered that up to me. I had to, again, educate myself and get well enough to be able to say, hey, I'm capable to do this at home. I want to get trained. And then the last year before my transplant, I was on peritoneal dialysis, which for me was much better for my system. It didn't feel as extreme. The hemodialysis for me just always left me feeling awful for the next 24 hours. And then you have like 10 hours of feeling good and you got to go back again. So it was a very difficult time in my life. And the peritoneal dialysis really actually made me feel like I had more freedom and autonomy of how I was giving myself my own treatments. So it made me feel more confident, that look, I can do this and I'm going to get better. And then, when I was 29, I got that call that, we're going to get you transplanted.
Okay. So you went from renal dialysis to peritoneal dialysis. When they diagnosed you with lupus, I assume they had like antibody levels, antiphospholipid antibodies, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Those were very high at some point, I would assume.
The ANA, I think it's called, that they would check. Like the inflammation scale was always just like sky high.
Okay. And so 29, you're scheduled for renal dialysis. Somebody, they found a kidney match for you, so they're going to swap out one of your kidneys, correct?
I actually had a living donor, and we did a kidney swap, which was a really beautiful thing that was available. It was kind of new back in the day. This was 2006. So I was actually at Johns Hopkins, and I was involved in one of the first multi-organ swaps, which became kind of the standard. But there was like 10 donors and 10 recipients. It was a big deal all over the news, right? So it was a beautiful thing to be a part of, and I waited, and I was so sick, Shawn. I was in a wheelchair for close to a year due to the intense amount of steroids and atrophy in my thighs that literally I was just so weak. I was just so weak. So I waited so long for this transplant, and it was beautiful. They made it beautiful. Then, the news stations were there, and it was a big deal. And my doctor pretty much said to me, my surgeon, like, okay, girl, you've waited a long time for this, and now you're better, and like, go get them and go live your life. Like, that was my message pretty much after this, like 10 years of severe illness, was like, now you got what you needed to be healthy, go conquer the world.
So your dietary strategy at that time at 29, you were no longer vegan, I assume, but what were you mostly doing at that time?
Yeah, so what I did was, again, because my blood work, I was really anemic and having issues, and they said, you need to amplify your protein, you need to eat more protein. So at that time, what I did was I had to let go of that mental conditioning that sometimes happens to vegans and vegetarians, where like they are so just mentally convinced that that is the best way to eat. I had to break that. And I was like, look, I have to break this if I want to survive. So let me start with eggs and like white meat, like turkey, chicken. That's how I started. But my mindset was still very brainwashed to thinking that vegan or vegetarian was the healthiest way to eat. It was almost like I was brainwashed into that system.
So had you adopted some sort of moral position on this? Because a lot of vegans particularly have this sort of belief that it's morally the right thing to do. Was that something that kind of had made its way into your mindset?
I think that it was partially the morality of the relationship with animals, but more than that, really was just like, this is the diet that's going to make me be the healthiest and be the fittest, and continue with being beautiful as I age. Like, this is the right way to do it. It was just, I became brainwashed by listening to the indoctrination constantly, and it was very hard for me to break that brainwash. But the illness did it, and then lo and behold, Shawn, which I know that you understand, is that it was the kidney. The kidney obviously made me feel better. We can't avoid the fact that having a transplant when you're sick is not going to help you. But I will tell you that over that time, then I started implementing more meat and healthy fats and started educating myself on what my body actually needs to be healthy. And ever since that point, I never returned. And I realized that I was under a form of brainwash being a vegan and vegetarian. And I felt way more healthy, and including things like my skin and my hair and my energy level. It all has just continued to improve as I've diminished the focus on being a vegetarian and even vegetables and fruits, and focused more on healthy meats. I do eat eggs. I do eat some vegetables. I do more of like a ketovore style diet. But at 48 now, many years past my last transplant, it's just so profound how much more healthy I am eating this way. It's just so obvious and so clear.
So let me go back to your transplant at 29. So you said you had a transplant swap. So basically your non-functioning kidney was actually transplanted into the donor. Is that what I'm hearing? And then she obviously, her healthy kidney was transplanted into you, or he or her. I'm not sure who it was.
Yeah, it was actually a man, and he was a Marine, which was kind of cool. So they're like, "Oh, you have a really big, hearty, healthy, patriotic kidney in you." So it's kind of interesting when so I was the recipient, he was the donor, right? So most people don't know this. You probably know this, but your native kidneys stay in your body. They don't remove them unless there's an infection or something like polycystic kidney that causes a problem. So I technically still have my two native kidneys, but when they fail, they atrophy because the blood supply just doesn't go to the organ anymore. So literally, it's like two little walnuts, like where my kidneys would be. And then they put the kidney up in the lower abdomen region and attach it to the femoral artery. So my first kidney transplant, it was so amazing because I would lay down and my stomach would have this big bump in it where this big guy's kidney was in my system. So so that's what happened. Was the swap was a male kidney was a match for me. And that's very specific as so far as the matching process. So he was a match to me. And then his kidney went into mine, but my native kidneys remained. So I
guess the swap part, I'm not sure, because I that's what I assume is a normal kidney transplant. Just take a donor and give it to you. Yeah, and I know they don't typically remove the others.
Just involves more people, and it's a way for them to get better matches. So it's not just two people. So they have all of this algorithm between 10 or 15 people to say your donor may not be matched for you, but this other guy in is a match for you.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Got it. Okay. So 29, you have the new kidney in. So then what happens?
Yeah. Then I'm listening to what my doctors say, and I'm finally feeling like I've got to the top of the mountain, and now I'm going to start my life. And really what happened was nobody prepared me, and nobody helped me to understand fully that I had just lost 10 years of my life in my 20s. I was just trying to survive. I was in survival mode from 20 to 30, and getting the kidney was a huge high. But very soon after that, I realized, oh my gosh, I have to figure out my life. I didn't finish college. I didn't get married. I didn't have kids. What are my finances? What am I going to do for work? And I just really was quite overwhelmed that, nobody really took time amongst my team to explain, when you're sick for 10 years and then you get a kidney, that doesn't mean that it's going to solve all your problems. Like, you have to start to really build your life again from scratch, a new foundation.
Yeah. So as I'm sure many people are aware, but just to put a point on this, when you have a kidney replacement, now you have to be on immunosuppressant anti-rejection medication. So what was that like, or what did you have to take, or what do you still take, I assume?
Yeah, I mean, coming from somebody who really was adopting that supernatural lifestyle, when I left that, the hospital, I left with a fistful of pills that I had to take for a period of time. And again, it was just felt like the antithesis of health to me, but it was just my path. It was part of my path, and I had to do it. And then over time, they were able to reduce medications, antivirals, and antibiotics. And then now, fortunately, because I'm still very devoted to my health and working out and being as healthy as possible, I actually just take 2 immunosuppression pills, which is Prograf and mycophenolate or Cellcept. And really, that's it. So because I continued to be committed to my health after my transplant, I see how my story, compared to a lot of people in this world of chronic illness and transplantation, is that not many people stress that, okay, you've overcome something really difficult, but now you're going to have to go back into something difficult and still commit to your diet and your well-being. Just because you have a new kidney doesn't mean that you have the right, or you should go back to your unhealthy lifestyle that maybe got you in that position to begin with. That's not emphasized as enough as it needs to. So sadly, I know a lot of people in the transplant community, and like you said, they're diabetic or whatever it may be. And because you have a functioning kidney, they think it's all right to go back to eating the crap they were eating before they were transplanted.
Okay, so swapping out your kidney does not cure lupus, though. I mean, as you probably are aware, right? So, I mean, you still have this disease, this propensity towards autoimmunity. And as you probably maybe surmise, that if you have one autoimmune disease, you're often likely to develop many other ones. That's a common scenario. So at what point did you, I mean, as you said, I'm going to dedicate myself to healthy life or continue with it after I got my kidney transplant. At what point did you sort of make this swap to more of a ketovore style animal food type situation, and how does that impacted your lifelong lupus?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's important to note again that I understood I was involved in a patient process and having an illness experience, but I was wise enough and I had done enough research to understand I wasn't going to fall victim to my illness as my identity, which is very rare in this community. And so what I realized was I'm going to have to continue to really work uphill to be as healthy as possible. And what I will say about the lupus was, you're right. They tell you that autoimmune disease is chronic, that you're going to continue to have it. But when I started dialysis the first time when I was 25 years old, I have not had any recurrence or sign of disease since I started dialysis. Now, that being said, I've been told by certain providers that the only reason you don't have any symptoms is because the immunosuppression is dampening the immune system response. And I've also had other providers tell me that who study lupus is somehow the disease process of lupus, again, I'm not a physician, but I've been told this, is that somehow they're discovering that it's burns out in the kidneys when the kidneys fail, and that the chances of having lupus present itself after kidney failure are like 1% to 3%. So I don't really know. People were to, most doctors would say, well, of course you don't have any symptoms because you're on immunosuppression. But that being said, I haven't had one symptom of an autoimmune disease since I was 25 years old, and the kidney actually failed and I was on dialysis. Not one.
Hey folks, it's Dr. ShawnBaker here. Hey, if you or someone you love is suffering from chronic disease and you're tired of just managing symptoms with potions, pills, and procedures, I want you to check out Revero.com. Our team of dedicated professionals is committed to tackling the root cause of your issue and finally getting you healthy. Hurry up, though. Our spaces are filling up very quickly.
Yeah, interesting. So, what drove you to, I guess, this more animal food ketovore style? What was it? What was a moment where you said, "This is where I want to go"?
Yeah. So again, I was eating, meat pretty normally after my first kidney transplants, but it was I'd say about 5 years ago when I was about 2 to 3 years into my second transplant, because transplants don't last forever.
Let's go back to that one. So what happened? Why a second transplant?
Okay, so I had my first kidney for about 11 years. And basically they told me, if you have a kidney transplant, if it's a deceased kidney, it can last anywhere from, they were saying 6 to 10 years. But if you have a living donor, it tends to last longer, and you may have up to 15 years, maybe even more if you're very lucky. So because organ transplantation is still, we're still learning so much about it, the medication, all the medication I take is nephrotoxic. So it's such an oxymoron. It's like I'm trying to protect the kidney, but all the medication is nephrotoxic, right? So again, it's just everybody gets a specific amount of medicine. There's not the research that says, well, you may be able to take less over time. Even though they do reduce it, they never feel comfortable completely taking you off medication unless somehow you've had some sort of stem cell therapy with an identical twin and they feel comfortable to not give you the medicine. So for me, the reasoning for the failure after 11 years was, the message I heard was, well, that can be normal. Or, well, maybe you were a little nephrotoxic, you had a little too much medication. Or also at that time I had UTIs. So they were saying maybe there was some sort of damage with some chronic UTIs that just, caused this. When I look back, I was still taking a lot of medication and just antibiotics. And so after the second transplant, I said to myself, I have to level up my awareness here. And how do I feel? Let me approach my human health like my own scientific method. What am I feeling? And I thought, well, generally I feel good, but I still have bloating, and sometimes I have gallbladder pain. And I just felt like my digestion hasn't never been great. So I started researching people like you, and I started researching, Ken Berry and Dr. Berg, people who were talking about the keto diet. This was about 5 years ago. And I really started researching. And I thought to myself, well, I have a transplant. So do I need to be cautious about just jumping into a high protein diet? That was something that I was questioning. But I decided, based off of the research that I had done, that I wanted to see if my digestion could improve, which I felt if my digestion and gut improved, it may improve other areas of my health that I'm not really aware of. So I committed about 5 years ago, fully committed to starting with a keto style diet and just eliminating the sugar and the carbohydrates. And I have to tell you, at that age, I was 40, and I had a lot of experience with trying different diets, and I have a wisdom about my own body. But within a week's time of cutting out the sugar and the carbohydrates and really committing to the higher, healthier fat and the proteins as my prime source of food, my stomach and digestion, for the first time ever, within a week's time, became completely regulated. My energy level went up, and it was so obvious that my body was starving for this kind of a diet. And from that point forward, I just never looked back. It was so evident and obvious that this was something my body needed, that I just changed from that point forward.
Okay, so 40, yeah, so 11 years, 29 to 40, you got the kidney. So you go in for another kidney transplant. Mm-hmm. How did that go? What was a sort of scenario, how that went?
Yeah, so that scenario was much different than the first because the disease processes wasn't there. At that point, it was just the kidney is no longer functioning as optimally, and we're going to have to replace the kidney. So I was a lot more healthy, perceivably healthy going into the second transplantation. It was more of a, like when you take your car into the shop to get a replacement, but the whole car is not broken down. So I had the knowledge of the experience. I already had my team. I had very gracious. I had another living donor. I mean, that right there, you're very lucky to have living donors and get the kidney. I understand the gratefulness of that. But it was more of an in and out process. I was on dialysis, but only for about a month prior to that second transplant. And after that second transplant, something very profound happened. I woke up and I wasn't as naive. And I thought to myself, okay, I understand where I am in my disease and health journey. And now I got to go even deeper and be more curious about the ways in which I can preserve my health because I have a complex history. So how can I continue to be curious and open-minded to different things that can continue to improve my health? And that was my journey after my second transplant, was really committing to how does a woman who's had this health history continue to actually improve her health and be curious and open-minded to try new things to live as long as I possibly can under my circumstances. And I've proven that. And I think a lot of that has to do with my diet.
All right. So you have the second, transplant, another living donor, fortunately. Sure the same, maybe same meds, not too much different there. So you said you as soon as you gave up all the sugar and stuff, it was like huge difference, right? And how long has that been now for you?
It's been almost 5 years. And I'm not exaggerating at all when I say within a week's time, I thought that no matter how thin I was or what diet I ate, that I was always going to be slightly bloated. I kind of resorted to the fact that I was always going to have a little pooch in my belly, and food was going to sometimes upset my stomach and maybe make me feel lethargic. I felt that no matter what I did, I was just resigned to that sort of a lifestyle. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that within a week's time, 2 bowel movements a day, my belly started flattening out, no bloating after I was eating, high energy to the point where I had to stop drinking coffee because my energy was so naturally high. And it was like night and day when I started to make this transition. So I've fully realized that, it is the carbohydrates for my body and the fact that I wasn't eating a very nutrient dense diet that was causing my problem in the first place. That's what I believe.
All right. So I assume you still have follow-up with maybe nephrology, primary care, maybe, I don't know if the transplant team still is involved in your care, probably not at this point, but have you relayed some of that information? Because you said at the beginning, you are, as a patient, trying to advocate for health within, I guess, the Texas Medical, I'm assuming you're at Texas Medical Center down there at some point. They got Methodists and all these other Herman and all these hospitals down there. But what's going on with that stuff?
Yeah, so eventually I ended up owning yoga studios, and during that process, and what I would realize that my typical client that would come in would be somebody who would say this: I've got a problem. I've got back pain, or I'm sad that my husband passed away, or there was some sort of trauma or problem, and they would say, I'm here because I've tried everything and it's not really working, and I thought maybe I'd come try yoga and maybe that can help me. And I started to understand that people were also seeking for deeper ways to improve their health outside of just what we're being told and medications that we're given when we're not feeling well. So when I went through my own experience, I had my own experience to draw upon, and I've done my own research and studying. I thought to myself, about 7 years ago, why am I just having yoga studios for my career? Like, I need to take this knowledge and wisdom and how I've been able to turn my life around back into the chronic illness and the transplantation community, because when I meet up with people in that community, which I'm very connected, is they're all suffering on so many levels and so over medicated and just not being able to often truly integrate their experience in a way where they're having a successful life, whether it be just in the world of working or just dietarily, and they kind of get overruled by the identity of their illness. And it's like they can't quite get back into life properly, or they're just very sick. So what I did was I found a physician, kind of serendipitously, who was working at Houston Methodist. She's also an instructor at Texas A&M. And this was about 7 years ago. We serendipitously found each other online. And her, as a provider, had a lot of the same frustrations that I had, was that we need to somehow level up in our care and our ability to critically think and go outside of the boxes that we've been in to help patients further. So we came together and created a nonprofit called Awakening Healthcare. And really, I moved from the East Coast to the Texas Medical Center to be closer to her and her family, and to start to create and implement programs for patients to have alternatives to improve their health. And when I say alternatives, I don't really mean anything woo-woo. I just mean like being more expansive about and curious about, have you tried, yoga for your stress instead of, in addition to your medication, and maybe you can lower that medication? Or how about exercise? How about getting out in light? How about your diet? Really just telling people through my personal experience of what has really turned something so tragic into something so healthy and beautiful. I try to share my experience and my commitment to health. And that's what I've been doing. Very recently, the project ended. And sadly, trying to implement change within such a rigid system that's so overworked, and it's just, it just functions the way that the system functions, trying to implement my work or what I called peer experiencers, or like peer-to-peer support for people who've really overcome physical health challenge and chronic illness, is difficult to do within the system. That was my passion, was to actually have a peer mentor on the transplant team or on these specific system teams, like maybe rheumatology, nephrology, transplant team, is to have a direct connection with somebody who has a lived experience, so they can share how they deal and overcome the challenge more naturally on a day-to-day basis. And sadly, over time, what I came to realize is that my message is in contradiction often to the typical protocols. And also that a lot of the things I was doing, I realized that a lot of the providers I was hooked up with and a lot of people within the system, they also weren't doing themselves. So I started to realize, oh boy, I'm into something here that's much larger than I imagined. So I've pulled back a little bit from the healthcare system, and I still do work with patients and even providers, but a little more outside of the system at this point.
So when you're obviously trying to advocate for it, and you're absolutely right, it's tough to change the system from within. The system is definitely, it's tailored for whatever it's tailored for, good or bad. Obviously you got a new kidney out of it. So, it probably saved your life to be fair, but there are some definite problems with that. You said you own, I guess some yoga facilities. Are you still seeing a big, heavy sort of bias towards plant-based? Yoga tends to be more women than men usually. At least I've been a couple times. This wasn't for me. My exercise is not yoga, but anyway, for whatever that is there still a pretty heavy bias towards everything needs vegetarian veganism? Because I think yoga comes from the East India, I believe, and it's got this vegetarian thing attached to it. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I will tell you that I've stopped. I don't have the yoga studios any longer, but I'm still active in the community and have a lot of friends within the community. But as my lifestyle shifted, I noticed that I no longer resonated with the aggregate of the yoga community. And what I've discovered is that there are some people breaking out within the yoga community, and that wellness type of community are starting to break out of this sort of dietary belief system as well. But still, speaking from 20 years experience, Shawn, you're absolutely right, is that still the majority of people amongst the yoga scene in America are women. And what I've noticed is that women are seeking, and they tend to attach to the yoga philosophy very often because there's some sort of internal damage, and they're seeking to feel better. And the beautiful thing about yoga is that it provides a natural way for a woman to get in touch with her body, and women can tend to be very somatic, very empathetic, and they can, somaticize how they're feeling. That's something that women can do. So there is such a benefit for stretching and moving stress and tension through the body through stretching and breathing. I think that's fantastic. But when the yoga becomes too spiritualized, or we start to feel like we're adopting, Indian principles within the American culture, it gets a little strange. And, that was one of the reasons I moved away from the communities, because I wanted to really focus on the science of yoga for health and not get too woo-woo and out there and adopt all of these extreme belief systems that sometimes the yoga community can have that proclivity to move women towards there. And again, I experience this. It's a desire to seek healing and recovery, often from, inner child wounds, or just, mental health issues or stress or something, and they can go too far in their belief system. So I do see a lot of people in the community still feeling that the righteousness is within the veganism and the vegetarian diet. But I think, fortunately, there are people within that community that are starting to wake up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just watched an interview of a gal who, she says, I'm very healthy. I'm a vegan. I'm a marathon runner. And then a few minutes later, she said she's lost her period at age 34, and she's distressed about that, and very thin. And so on a sort of and I was like, maybe you should put two and two together. Just say, anyway.
And that's important to know, is that being thin and appearing to be healthy does not mean that you're healthy. That's what I learned.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can be undernourished for sure. And I mean, I think a woman's loss of a period is just that in many cases, not always, but it's like your body does not have the resources to support another life. And we're going to shut down, you're going to shut down your ability to do so.
Exactly.
All right. So within your advocacy of trying to help patients, I mean, are you running up against, the system is challenging to change. This is one of the reasons we started my company, Revero, because we work, alongside the system, but we're not in the system, because the system really has some real significant conflicts that I don't know if they're even resolvable. What has been your either successes or challenges?
Right. Well, through the Awakening Healthcare, the North Star of that project was to implement within the system. And I have to be honest with you, it failed. And I got a really, really good backdoor view of what was going on behind the scenes in some of these systems within the providership, and just what was going on. And at the same time, we were butt up against, everything that happened in 2020 and preceding with the virus. So all of a sudden I was realizing, me coming in and really talking about my transformation had to do with autonomy. And my transformation had to do with maybe being confident enough to go out of the box and try new things outside what the system is telling you. At some point, I had to accept my message is actually no longer compatible with the healthcare system. So that dream a little bit had to die. So you're right. What I do now is I've allowed myself, now that I'm outside of the system, to really, truly, fully be myself and advocate for health transparency, autonomy. I often, just try to take people that have a complex history and remind them that your complex history doesn't have to be complicated, right? Like you don't have to complexify it. Like sun, exercise, healthy relationships. Like a lot of people with chronic illness, I've discovered, and from my personal experience, have a really toxic environment. Not just the air that we breathe and the chemicals in our food, but relationship wise. They have a lot of, inner frustration or guilt or shame or anger, or live with toxic people or accept toxic behaviors. They don't have boundaries. So there's a lot of mental health that's coupled with chronic disease. And so what I try to do is just simplify it. Is that I don't care how many diseases you have or what you're going through, is that you have the ability to change. If you have will and determinism, you can often change your health outcome. Like, let's be transparent. Let's be confident enough to challenge what you're being told. And, again, use the scientific method on yourself, not in an extreme way, but try something else. Find another way to do things. And so I kind of now exist in that liminal space between honoring what the system does well, and then also kind of encouraging people to go beyond some of the ways they've been indoctrinated to be codependent on it, because my experience has been honoring what the system does well, but then really pulling myself back out of it and again becoming the arbiter of my own health experience as just an experience I live with, but definitely not my identity. And I'm not interested to marry any system around it.
Yeah, I mean, you came to this through a number of things, but ultimately it coalesced around lupus, and then you went through your kidney transplants, dialysis kidney transplants. Do the people you tend to reach out to? I mean, it's just any sort of health issue. I mean, because I can tell you from my experience, I've seen a number of people with lupus actually put it in remission and avoid what you went through, likely, which is wonderful. I mean, I'm sure if you would have known 25 years ago, you would have been like, I could have avoided all this. I mean, is that something that maybe frustrates you in a way, perhaps?
It doesn't frustrate me because, but you're absolutely right. As I realize now, this many years later, looking back, if I were to reverse engineer everything, I think if somebody were to have truly sat with me and addressed my stress revolving some childhood stuff that I was dealing with, like, I think if somebody were to have addressed my stress and really sat with me and said, like, really, what are you really feeling and what are you really struggling with? And also encouraged me to change my diet out of that vegan lifestyle, I think it would have been as simple as that. Is for me to really have someone sit with me empathetically so I could process some of my childhood and change my diet. I think my destiny might have been different, but because I've had the destiny that I've had, I use my experience to help people who are still in that position to, number one, provide a source and a face. I don't think there's anything more powerful than to have somebody that has a disease or condition and to sit there as a peer mentor and to say, like, I've been through all this. I've been through the extremes of the extremes, and I'm here as a demonstration to show to you that you can do it. That right there trumps even, I think, what doctors often can do. So my approach with Awakening Healthcare was, if you guys take your physician expertise and you couple it with somebody like me and people like me who have radically overcome these challenges, do you understand your potential for changing this chronic illness narrative? But again, I got the resistance was that, well, you're just the patient. And my plight has been, no, I don't think you understand how powerful somebody who's overcome all of this is to the person newly diagnosed or to the person who's struggling with their chronic illness, to see a face of someone who's been through it and has succeeded through these horrific, dark times in their life. So that's what I was trying to do. And I realized that my voice, even though we claim and tout patient-centered care, my voice doesn't really have a role within the system. So I try to be that voice outside.
So 5 years ago on this sort of ketogenic or low carb style lifestyle, I mean, you're 8 years into a new transplant. Your first one lasted 11 years. Are you confident that this one's going to last longer, or what are your thoughts around this? I mean, I assume you get regular checkups to see how it's doing. And so Can you compare this kidney to the one you had before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously there's life is life, right? I can't control everything. But what I will say is I do feel confident. And I follow up with my nephrologist, usually like every 6 to 8 months. So I'm very deliberate with that. I don't have any other doctors. I've tried to minimize my physician group because, again, when you have this kind of situation and then you're constantly at the doctors and dealing with appointments and insurance and this, that, it brings you down. It just limits your potential. So I've said to myself, what are the necessities for me? Let me be realistic about that. So I see my doctors and I do that. But otherwise, it's really, truly about me understanding that my health is in my own hands, actually. So I do have confidence that the kidney is going to last longer, with the understanding that anything can happen. But again, for me, what makes most sense is that the quality of this diet fixing my gut, I feel it was the missing link between what happened amongst my nervous system, what happened in my immune system. I think that it's about the gut. And for me, having healthy digestion, really, as simply as that sounds, feels like the most clear indicator that I'm doing something right that's protecting my other systems.
Well, that's I mean, and I don't doubt it. I'm just saying, objectively, like when it came to like 10 years into your first kidney transplant, when did you know that was going to need to be swapped out, and why? And compare that to now.
Yeah, well, at that point, it was just through blood work that I saw that there was a diminishment of function.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So currently your blood work looks fine. Your GFR is whatever they're using to track it with.
Right. Yeah. GFR looks fine. So usually for me, a couple of things on my blood work that are skewed, probably they've told me because of long-term steroid use or when the lupus was very active. I mean, in my early 20s, I had taken a lot of medication, is that I have chronically low white blood cell count and neutrophil counts. And they think that there's a little bit of bone marrow suppression because of all the medication. Now, this has been for the longest time. So, ironically, my white blood cell count usually runs normally around like 2.3 to 2.6, which is low. But strangely, I very rarely get sick. I'm careful. I mean, even through the whole virus thing, I didn't get sick. And I'm thinking, wow, how crazy. Like they're really, I don't want to be controversial here, but they're really stressing the fact that anybody immunocompromised or vulnerable must get multiple boosters and vaccines and be very, very careful. And I didn't get sick once. And I was thinking, how unusual is that I have a very low I'm neutropenic. I've got low white blood cell count. Why am I not getting sick? I don't understand. So it's just there's just things that seem like an anomaly to me. But I do the best that I can, Shawn. I know that the diet has been a huge change for me. The other thing that I want to say that's really important is that somehow I was on this journey towards like deprivation is better, or like, let me keep removing things out of my life and diet to be healthier. Somehow within my mind, I was at that state for whatever reason. And when I started eating keto and Ketovore, something happened in my gut that I never felt before. And that was when I was 40 years old, is that for the first time in my life, I understood what satiation was. I never felt that ever in my life before. And it hit me on a physical level, on a mental level, even on a spiritual level. I was like, oh my gosh. I was deprivating myself for some reason for so long, thinking that was the way to health, when the way to health is to not deprive yourself of love, life, happiness, nutrients, fat, whatever it is. It's just my life completely changed when I understood my relationship between health and satiation over somehow I got to keep removing things to be healthy and be deprivated and just eat fruits and like vegetables my whole life.
Very good. Well, unfortunately, we are just running up on our time here. So, Stephanie, where if people wanted to find out more about what you're doing, where would they go?
I would just send them to my website, which is my full name, StephanieMoDavis.com. And if anybody wants to reach out or tell their story, I'd be more than happy to share. Thank you so much, Shawn.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.